And so as a result, our body is starving at a cellular level. We aren't getting those vitamins and minerals that are crucial for our function. But we're also noticing that those foods are bland. You know, a tomato now does not taste like a tomato 30 years ago.
Hey, welcome back to the Prospecting Show. Today's episode is brought to you by Fuelproof Health. Fuelproof Health is a resource for athletes and movement enthusiasts alike. Their goal is to raise awareness about the underreported dangers of eating disorders, unrealistic training expectations, and negative body image within the movement community. They provide evidence-based information on a variety of movement and food topics, connect a community of athletes of all ages and skill levels, and provide resources that help reinforce sustainable habits and share nutritional strategies to fuel both the body and the soul. Join the conversation and discover how fueling their lifelong athlete at fuelproofhealth.com and on Instagram at fuelproofhealth. Enjoy the show. To start the session here, maybe you could give the listeners a background on where you come from, you know, what you're trying to do, so that way they can have a little lay of the land.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a bit of a strange combination of things. My educational background is, first and foremost, I did my bachelor's degree in nutrition and nutraceutical science. And then I proceeded to do my master's at the same university, the University of Guelph, in human health sciences. And so with that, I was very interested, obviously, in the nutritional side of things, but I never felt like I just wanted to be in research or just wanted to be in clinical nutrition. I always felt like I wanted to do something more. And I always imagined myself in a really like integrative, holistic type practice where you could address people's health from all these different perspectives. And it actually morphed into this strange thing where I ended up collaborating with a natural skincare company based out of Toronto, Canada. And that's what I do during the day, as I'm the science and wellness manager at this skincare company. And I use all of those dimensions of wellness to bring healthy living to the forefront of skin health. So that's what I do during the day. But when I was in my university degree, I was still very connected to nutrition and health, and I was always part of my athletic community. And so I started working on a passion project on the side that morphed into Fuelproof Health. And Fuelproof really is a place, a network, a resource for athletes that's designed to focus on high performance in a sustainable way. So we're trying to give athletes motivation and confidence so that they can make lifelong nutritional choices and movement choices that will develop the whole person and can carry out throughout life. So I kind of balance these two, my main kind of job, and then as well this sort of passion project on the side.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too, because you're getting kind of both sides of the businesses and kind of marrying them together. But you've also had some experience, in school beyond what maybe other people that are in the nutritional space have. Not just from the provider side, but also you have some formal education in it. So, with your master's, what did you do there? What did you study there that you think has really kind of helped you with your job now?
A lot is more broader concepts. So learning how to look into the literature, decipher what makes a good quality study and what is more biased. And then you can extract that information and being able to communicate it to people, just the lay person, in a way that resonates with them. That was a skill that really helped me. And helped me in both of my jobs, helping athletes, but also helping the average consumer understand what to look for when they're looking for reputable skincare and things that can actually make a difference in the look and function of their skin. So any science degree or any kind of education, I think you learn these very specific skills. So maybe at a cellular level, how the body is working. But I think these broader concepts and that little bit of skepticism really helps when you're marketing something, when you're trying to explain concepts to people. So those skills definitely helped me in all places in my life, really.
And do you think that with doing the master's degree, because you have to be able to translate that knowledge, you're talking about that high end kind of professional medical knowledge in a, a PubMed article or something like that, and kind of translate that into the everyday person who maybe doesn't have that much industry experience? Do you find that that has an impact on the outcome for people? Like, if they understand what they're doing, do you find that they get better result, or do you find it's really just for your knowledge?
Oh, absolutely, for the client, because they hear all this information. There's so much information coming at them every single day from different sources. And a lot of the time when people say, oh, I did some research, it just means Googling and reading some of the articles put there. And a lot of those articles maybe just give them the top line information, and they don't necessarily understand it, and they don't necessarily believe it because they get so much contradictory information every day. So being able to say, here's some actual research, some clinical articles, and pulling the information and translating it, bringing it down to a very understandable level, they appreciate that, and then they can actually action that information.
And in your experience going from Fuelproof and having your full day job, do you notice any significant differences? Because one's more of an entrepreneurial kind of, on your own sort of thing with maybe some other team members, but then the other one's very, integrated. Do you find a difference between the two of them since you're sharing the same knowledge?
Yeah, they definitely have their differences completely. My day job, I mean, the Consonant Skincare is the company that I work for in my day job, and we do have a larger team than Fuelproof, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of skills that do translate, the way that you market information, the way that you talk to clients, but we're working with two different consumer demographics, really. People that are interested in skincare are maybe completely different than the athletes I work with, but there is a lot of overlap in the way that people take in information, and they do learn in similar ways. So that scientific translation, it really is similar across the two.
And in your experience, what do you think is most important for someone that is a student athlete, right? You kind of talked about that early on. And if somebody's going to put all this effort into becoming a great athlete, obviously 50% of that's going to come down to what they do when they're not there, right? Their diet, their exercise, and all these other pieces is outside of their sport. So where do you see what you're doing fit into the student athlete kind of population?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Athletes are very tricky because often they're extremely self-motivated, and they also have this discipline that tends to push them sometimes over the edge. And that's why I started Fuelproof. Was I went into kind of a dark place from sport, and I had to bring myself out of that and learn a lot about my body and the way that I viewed nutrition and sport. And so I think with a student athlete, the most important thing is to find that balance. And it's much easier said than done. And I think that's kind of what the goal of Fuelproof is to provide that scientific, reputable information and the tools to help people find that sustainable balance. And really, it can never just be about the sport. It's about all dimensions of wellness. So your mental health, your physical health, your social health, how you're interacting with the world around you, striking that balance between all those factors is the best thing that you can do as a student athlete. And finding your rhythm and finding how you can think about academics and all these other factors in a really crucial time in your life, being, 20, 18 years old sometimes, it can be a challenge. So finding that balance and finding what works for you.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting concept too, because I think people look at athletics and education and realize that at the university or college level, a lot of times those get tied together because they're going to school for the degree, but they're also going there for sports. And it's interesting with me living in the United States now, you see a huge push in U.S. colleges for athletics actually over academics in most part, which, that's neither here nor there. I think that it's probably a misrepresentation of most schools, but people take athletics very, very seriously here.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I think the kind of work that you're doing applies even more in the US than Canada because there's so many student athletes.
And the pressure that comes with that too, these athletes that perceive, their role in the university community just to be there for sport, that's a lot. That can be a unhealthy place to be often. So it definitely impacts the overall health of these athletes.
Yeah, and I think the transition that happens for a lot of these athletes, and I personally saw this because I went to an undergraduate in Canada, went to a doctorate level in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I got both education systems, and one of the things that I noticed right off the bat is that people, once they leave school and they were in that non-academic role, they're in that kind of sports role or athletic role, they almost don't know what to do when they finish school because their whole identity is kind of ripped out
Yeah.
from under them. They realize they're not going to be a professional athlete. They
Mm-hmm.
realize they love diet and exercise and what they do, but they really have no idea how to translate that into the real world. So what's your thought on that? Like, what do you think that's a problem? Do you think it's just kind of a mindset thing? How do they fix that?
Yeah, it is definitely something that can become a problem. And this is sort of what Fuelproof is trying to do as well, is getting people to look at sport as not just what they're training for this season or this particular race that's coming up, but looking at how movement and food can enrich your life and doing it for more than just their sport, but doing it because there's a mental health benefit to exercise and movement. And there's implications of movement-based injuries that can affect you in your older life. Things like bone density are hugely dependent on what you do in your 20s. And that can affect how you live as an adult when you're 80 years old, when you're even 60 and 70 years old. So finding that place where you're keeping active and you're eating well, not just for performance, but because it's something that's helping you be a healthier person. I think that's really key during those very intense periods of athleticism for a lot of students in school, and kind of recognizing the symptoms and making sure that you're having a healthy relationship with those athletic endeavors. That can be really crucial to making sure that it's part of your identity, but it's not consuming your entire identity.
Yeah, and I think the really key point there is that you talked about what you do in your 20s is really critical. And so I kind of asked this question to you. Is it genetics or lifestyle that you value more?
That I value more, or
Yeah.
that
Well,
people.
what do you think people will benefit more from? Is it really like, hey, your genetic makeup is the way it is, and that's just how it's going to be? Or is it about how you eat and how you exercise? Because there's kind of this balance between both,
Mhm.
right? There's people who say, oh, I'm big boned or I'm small boned or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And that's really kind of a push towards genetics. But I think there's something to be said about what you do to your body, right?
100%. I mean, I don't have the answer to that. Science doesn't have the answer for that. It's the age old question of nature over nurture. So, what's written in our DNA and what can we choose? And there's a lot of ways to look at this. And the scientific evidence does show that through behavioral and environmental changes, we have the ability to turn on and turn off different genes. So, the ethylation or methylation of certain genes that can actually start to express or suppress certain genes. So there is potentially the ability for us to rewrite what's in our DNA. However, I also think that mentality has a massive impact on how we move and how we act as humans. So I was actually in my university degree, I was part of a research study that looked at whether you got your genetic information that told you that you had a predisposition to a certain disorder, whether you changed your nutritional habits based on knowing that you did or didn't have that specific disorder. And they actually found that those that were given simply the information about how to prevent the disorder changed their actions more than the people that received the information saying that they had that disorder. And so, to break it down a little bit, sometimes if you're told that you have the predisposition to a certain disease, you think it's out of your hands and you kind of throw in the towel. But if you're just given information saying, hey, here are some strategies to live a healthier life, people are more willing to make those changes, thinking that they're in the driver's seat and they have control over those. So it just speaks to the mentality of, where we draw our motivation from, and if we think that we have control over a situation. So in practice, I think by saying, I'm not a runner, I was never built as a runner, you're not going to be a runner. But from my personal experience, I wasn't someone who was tall and lean. In my sort of university career, I was on the rowing team. So I was, someone who had quite large quad muscles. I was not lean. I was very strong and muscular. And after I graduated university, that's when I switched to long distance running. And if I had thought, I'm not a runner, I'll never be a runner, then no, I would never have become a runner. But by being able to just do running because it was something I enjoyed, it was something I wanted to do for a challenge, and I focused on the sort of performance goals I had, my body then adapted and changed, and I became what most people would consider to be a runner. So I think there is a certain degree of genetic predisposition, but we shouldn't let that stop us from working towards, especially in athletics, working towards that kind of goal that we have.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too that you kind of put out the fact that you talked really about epigenetics there, right? And then the fact
Yes.
that the environment that you place the body in, or the environment you place the mind in, has an impact in the way that you express or kind of repress specific types of genes in the body. And it's interesting that Craig Venter, who did the Human Genome Project, he looked a lot at parts of the human makeup and tried to figure out, well, we're 90 something percent, the same, but there's this percentage where we're different. And the question is, are we different genetically up front without any impact, or are we actually different through an epigenetic expression, either the food we eat, the people we talk to, the way the mental health is, exercise, diet, lifestyle, whatever it is. And one of the things that I think the Human Genome Project is really looking at right now is, what is the epigenetic expression, right? Like, what can we do to our bodies to improve either the outcome, either physically or mentally? And I think that's like you said, it's a question that hasn't been answered yet. But at the same time, I think it's worthwhile to look at what people are doing that are healthy. And one of the biggest examples of this, I think, is the blue zones. Are you familiar with that at all?
Actually, no, I'm not.
So the blue zones are kind of an interesting concept. And what that is there's these pockets around the world that have the highest life expectancy. And basically what they've done is they've done some like acute research. So these short-term studies and a couple long-term studies, but mostly short-term, to look at what is the lifestyle, what is the diet, what is the kind of overall makeup or the epigenetic expression of people in these, I think it's 8 or maybe 9 regions around the world. And these people all live over 95 years old. And it's interesting because one of the things that is found in all of the regions that are blue zones right now is that they all take in a small amount of alcohol. And that's a very interesting component for people, because they say, there's always this, don't drink alcohol, it's bad for you, you need to have a really healthy diet, you need to do this. And it's not to say that they don't have a good diet. Most of these people actually do have a good diet, but at every single meal that they have, or almost every single meal they have some type of wine most of the time. And on top of that, compared to the US and Canada, where you have highly processed foods, a lot of the blue zone regions are focused on fresh picked fruit and vegetables, which, I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? I think a lot of people sit there and go, okay, well, yeah, fruits and vegetables are ideal for you. But in the blue zones, the really interesting thing about it is that they aren't modifying their diet because they're trying to do a quote unquote diet. They're just eating what they're used to, right? Which is very plant-based. It would be considered organic in most of North America, but they're not actively searching for that like we would do in Canada, Canada and the US, right? They're looking at it and saying, I'm eating what I think is normal, which is a heavy plant diet, organic food. It's having some meat, but not too much, and not a lot of processed food. Which is super, super interesting, because those people who are living 95 years and older, obviously they've figured something out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've seen some of the studies on these kind of blue zones. I hadn't heard it called that, but a lot of the interesting components are also kind of what I was saying before, these other dimensions of wellness. So they're often in groups, right? They're eating as a social thing. They have traditions. Maybe they're eating traditionally raised animals, or they're preparing food in traditional ways. They aren't just thinking about, okay, am I eating for health? They're eating because of all these other dimensions of wellness. And I think it really brings it all together, and that's what's sustainable, and that's what's healthy. And that's a lot of what I'm trying to get people to do and recognize is, don't just move for performance, don't just exercise for your health, but do it for all these other reasons, because that's what makes it sustainable and that's what makes it healthy and enjoyable. So it's nice to see that there's these components being put to longevity as well, and how people live in quality as well.
Well, the really interesting thing too about the blue zones is it's not just diet related. The other part of
Mhm.
it that is kind of brought up, at least if you read some of the books like the Blue Zone Project or look at some of the videos, one of the things that they talk about is that these individuals who are living to 95, plus, they all do exercise, but they don't do it like we do in the United States or Canada. They don't go to the gym and pick up weights and put them back down and say, okay, I did some exercise. What they do is their whole lifestyle is based around
Mhm.
exercise, right? They could be 85 years old and they're still walking 5 miles a day back and forth to get places instead of getting in a car, driving, going to
Yep.
McDonald's, eating a $2,500, 2,500 calorie meal, and then coming back and sitting on their couch and watching 4 hours of TV. Instead, they're walking, extensive distances to have fruits and vegetables that they pick themselves and modify
Mhm.
themselves, as opposed to going through kind of this North American processing system of taking a fruit or vegetable that would normally not last very long at all, and they have to preserve it to be able to move it from South America to North America, or from East Asia to North America. And it's really interesting because people in the blue zones, they're actually very into cooking their own food, having and creating their own alcohol, and also making sure that meals are not about eating for fullness. It's just about eating because they enjoy doing
Yeah.
that. It's very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see all these things coming together. It's all just one lifestyle too. It's, everything's connected, and it's not these segmented things. It's not going to the gym. Okay, now I'm eating. It's all part of this sort of integrated lifestyle. So I think that's really cool and interesting.
In your experience, because you have so much of that nutritional background, what do you see in the like Canadian US market? Do you think that people are under supplementing, over supplementing? They have good diets, bad diets, they're changing? Like, give us some background on what you think the kind of the future is for healthcare and in wellness in the US and Canada.
It's hard to know what sort of the future will bring. I definitely see sustainability being a big factor. So we're seeing kind of that rise in plant-based foods, the Beyond Meat burgers, those types of things where there is that conscious effort to make the carbon footprint lowered. But in terms of kind of what everyone's doing, you kind of touched on it. Yeah, this rate, like ultra processed food environment that we're constantly in, that's definitely a big problem. And then kind of the cultural elements of eating. We don't eat with people in an environment where we're cooking and sharing recipes. A lot of what we do is we do eat socially, but we're not eating socially in the right way. I think we should be encouraging people to cook together and bond over food and incorporate traditional food practices. We should be getting excited to shop for ingredients and look for things more locally. We should be teaching young people about where foods are grown and where they come from, and about seasons and agricultural practices, and then incorporating all those other sort of dimensions as well. So including lifestyle factors and movement into how we're eating. I think the shift that we're going to see the most is going to be with food processing. People are starting to recognize that ultra processed foods, these foods that are not even in a state of recognition, the ingredient list is 100 ingredients long, and most of them aren't even food. So I hope and I think the industry is going to be moving towards making food out of real food. And I hope with that comes sort of the increase in nutrition and supplements, or the increase in nutrients within the food as we continue to make food without the processing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's probably true, right? Is that they're moving away from the current processing kind of process that they go through, right? To take food from another country, bring it into North America where it can't sustainably grow in its own right now. And because, you get, things like bananas from Costa Rica, right? You take a
mhm.
banana 30 years ago or 40 years ago, there was no such thing as a seedless banana, but that's what everybody's used to right now, is a banana that has no seeds. And because we've modified this fruit over time, it's really become different than what people think. And at the end of the day, you could have whatever stance you want on genetically modified foods, but likely foods that have more preservatives and foods that are more processed are going to be less ideal for the body. And because of that, we have to really modify our diet or take supplementation to kind of make up for it, right?
Absolutely. And something that's interesting that I don't know whether it's going to be something, I don't know if it's in high enough demand, but something that really resonated with me in a food trend that I would like to see, I learned from the book, The Dorito Effect. And the whole concept is that in the way that we perform agriculture and the way that we raise animals, we need it fast. We need to grow food in a shorter amount of time, and we need a higher yield. So the result is things like tomatoes that instead of taking 30, 40 days to grow, they reach full maturity at 2 weeks. And the result is dilution of vitamins and minerals in those foods. And the same happens with meats and chicken. Chickens are full grown now in a third of the time that it takes or used to take a chicken to reach full maturity. And so as these micronutrients and minerals are diluting in the meat and in the flesh of these fruits and vegetables, the flavor comes out of it as well. And so as a result, our body is starving at a cellular level. We aren't getting those vitamins and minerals that are crucial for our function. But we're also noticing that those foods are bland. A tomato now does not taste like a tomato 30 years ago. And we're compensating by creating artificial and natural flavors. And we're adding those to foods. And we're not used to eating foods without dressing. I mean, when's the last time you ate a salad that didn't have a dressing on it? Maybe just a squeeze of like lemon or lime juice would be all it needed if it were produce grown with its full nutrient profile and its full flavor profile. So something I would love to see as a food trend is the consumers demanding food that's nutrient rich and still has that high yield, so we can still feed the populations that we need to feed. And it is something that scientists are capable of, but because there's no push for consumers to have those types of produce and meats, it's not happening, but we have the science and technology to make it happen. So that's kind of my hope, is that that's a food trend that we're going to see, that I hope people start to catch on to. And I definitely recommend the book, The Dorito Effect, to learn a little bit more about it, because it's fascinating and so crucial.
And kind of to wrap things up here, because we talked about a lot of different components, maybe give a recap of what Fuelproof is actually all about, and then how people can reach you after this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a joke. I'm kind of a jack of all trades. So anything health and nutrition, I'm on board with. But Fuelproof is for athletes and it's for movement enthusiasts. So the mission is just to propel athletes to be their best, highest performing selves now and throughout life. So Fuelproof offers a community of athletes sharing their stories about athlete sustainability. It's a place to get scientifically reputable information about movement and about sport and nutrition. And it's also a place to get resources to put it into action. So you can find us on Instagram at Fuelproof Health, as well as on fuelproofhealth.com. And we're looking for athletes that have something to say. They have a story. We're looking for researchers that are working on literature in those areas to bring it to the forefront and to start those conversations about really what it means to be an athlete.